Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Breaking the Habit. So, a little bit of a change of pace today. We're doing a Q&A. I want to answer some of the questions that have come in, that I've received from people. And again, shukran so much for sending the questions in. I really appreciate the candid nature with which the questions were asked. You know, a lot of people were like quite direct, and I think that's really what's called for. Thank you. In this time, because there's when it comes to addiction, when there's a lack of clarity, when there's sort of a gray area, that's usually where our addicts hide out. And so, for us to truly benefit, we keep speaking about rigorous honesty, but the honesty does require openness for us to speak freely and to talk about what the issues actually are. One of the big complaints we have in society, especially in the Muslim community here in Cape Town, is that no one's talking about things. No one's calling it for what it is, and that was never really the case. Especially in Islam, if you look at the legacy of Islam, and even just the nature of the subject, if you look at a book of fiqh, it speaks about things in a very plain and open manner, because there should be no gray area when it comes to fiqh. And so, why should there be gray area in any other area of our lives? So, we take example from our teachers to push through the discomfort, to start to talk about what really pains us, again for the purpose of drawing closer to Allah. So some of the questions that came through were around women, pornography, family, and food. So I'll tackle the food one just quickly, because we've spoken about overeaters or compulsive eating. We've even touched a little bit on anorexia, and one of the big questions is just how do I know if I'm a compulsive overeater, right? So, again, I've got a list of questions, and if you want, you can check out Overeaters Anonymous. If you just Google it, you'll come up with a website. There is a chapter here in Cape Town, so if you want to attend the meetings or use their tools, you're more than welcome to. Right? So there are 15 questions, simple yes or no questions, and the idea is simply that if you identify as, or if you answer yes to 3 or more of these questions, then it's probable that you either have or are on your way to having a compulsive overeating problem, right? Right, so let's begin. Question number 1, do you eat when not hungry? Right. Question number 2, do you go on eating binges for no apparent reason? Question 3, do you have feelings of guilt and remorse after overeating? 4, do you give too much time and thought to food? 5, do you look forward with pleasure and anticipation to the time when you can eat alone? 6, do you plan these secret binges ahead of time? 7, do you eat sensibly before others and make up for it alone? So basically, binge when you're alone, but in front of other people, you're all like, salad and, a little side meal or whatever. 8, is your weight affecting the way you live your life? 9, have you tried to diet for a week or longer only to fall short of your goal? 10, do you resent others telling you to use a little willpower to stop overeating? 11, despite evidence to the contrary, have you continued to assert that you can diet on your own whenever you wish? 12, do you crave to eat at a definite time, day or night, other than mealtime? 13, do you eat to escape from worries or trouble? Like comfort eating. 14, have you ever been treated for obesity or a food-related condition? 15, does your eating behavior make you or others unhappy? So there we go. If you find that you answer yes to 3 or more of those questions, and the questions are on overeatersanonymous.org.za, if you go into the navigation menu under New to OA, then you'll find those questions there, right? Now, just for those that are wondering, well, what's the way out here? All right. So yes, I've identified, but how do I get better? They give you they offer 9 tools of recovery. For some of you, you might find it you might find it comforting that there are so many similar to the other areas of recovery. For others, you may find this frustrating, because very often as addicts, we like to think that our struggle is unique and our problem is unique, and it requires a unique approach. So they have here 9 tools of recovery. Number 1, a plan of eating, right? So this is different from a diet. This isn't about having a diet, staying away from anything. This is about understanding what it is that your body needs, like at a healthy level. It's about identifying what is healthy and not going beyond that. Sponsorship, meetings, and that's like they obviously referencing the 12-step group. Telephone, which is reaching out to people. Writing, which is doing step work or journaling or that kind of thing. Literature, so reading literature related to the topic of overeating or addiction in general. Anonymity. Part of why anonymity is a tool is simply because when we remain anonymous, it helps to maintain the safe space in our mind that we seek prior to getting well and prior to opening up on a deeper and deeper level. You notice that the questions or the exercises that we've gone through over the last couple of days, and the steps that are more advanced, so like the 4th step, we're doing a moral inventory, and step 5, we're sharing. That requires considerably more privacy or more anonymity, a greater need for a safe space than simply admitting we have a problem. Then service. Service is a tool that I think is very underrated. We tend to think of service as there's one way we think about it when it's like very altruistic, right? And there's another way we think about it where it's like, oh well, that's for those who aren't intelligent enough, who don't have an education, or down in the gutter, who can't do better for themselves. And then you find those who have discovered sort of the joy of service. Like as an addict, especially when you hit rock bottom, there's very few things that you can actually feel proud of. There's very few ways in which you feel you actually contribute to the world. Simply because you may have stolen from people, you may have lied and cheated and broken hearts and torn your family apart. And so there's very little that people are turning to you for. So when we engage in acts of service, not only do we move outside of our usual paradigm or framework of me, I want what I want when I want it. We put the narcissism on hold and the self-seeking on hold, and we instead tend to the needs of others. Right? That's why one of the things that they'll repeat over and over in the 12-step program is that the most important member in the room is the newcomer. Right? So service, what it does is it helps us rebuild our sense of self, our sense of self-worth, our feeling of contributing to society, our feelings of actually being useful. Right? And this is whether you are the literature guy, whether you're the tea and coffee guy, whether you are the snacks person, whether you are just the greeter at the door. It really doesn't matter. Right? Any position of service, there's benefit in it. And if you're not part of a meeting, then find some other way to be of service to people. I have a neighbor, in the house that I grew up in. Our neighbor there used to be a shubin, and there were like some seriously unsavory characters, and even now they are like questionable characters there. But one of the people that live there is just, she does this thing that absolutely just blows my mind every time I see it. Every day she sweeps in front of our house and then extends all the way to the end of the road, sweeping her entire side of the street. In addiction, we talk about sticking to your side of the street, not focusing on other people's addictions, not focusing on fixing others or telling them where they're wrong or whatever, but like really focusing on yourself. And this lady for me is just the epitome of that. She doesn't need to sweep in front of our house. She doesn't need to sweep in front of anyone else's house. She doesn't even really need to sweep in front of her own house, right? But she does so. And it just, that side of the street just always looks, neat and decent. And we have this one tree that sheds, these little flower buds and things like that. And it creates a massive mess in front of our place. But she'll sweep nonetheless, every day. No one pays her for it. No one's asking anything of her. She does it. And so it's a way to be of service. There was another article I read of a guy, I think it was like maybe Camps Bay or Clifton side, where he would go every day and he'd clean the beach. He's not paid to do it. He didn't have another job. So he figured, why not? I might as well put myself to use. And so he'd go and clean. And eventually people noticed and they hired him for something. I forget what it was, but he found employment through it. It wasn't necessarily his objective. He just found a way to be a contributing, member of society. And this is what so many of us lack in our lives. We work and we contribute at work, but for the most part, we're there because we need to be or because we get paid. It's very rarely that we're doing it for selfless reasons or, out of the goodness of our heart, right? And choosing to be of service tunes into that a little bit more. The selflessness, doing it out of the goodness of our heart. And then, from an Islamic perspective, we can really go to town with this idea of being of service. Because if you think about there's a hadith, Qudsi, where Allah mentions that, tell my slave that I'm in the service of the one I'm in the service of my slave as long as he's in the service of his brother. Right? So just imagine the struggles that we all face, and we seek, at least in theory, or perhaps in dua, Allah's intervention. And we're like, Allah, just take this away from me, and when you're going to help me, and how you're going to, it's like we're seeking, but Allah gives us the formula. Like, go help others and I will help you. Right? And this really, it starts to really cause us to question, if you really reflect on it, how much more assistance could I be receiving, especially relative to how much more use can I be to the community at large. This isn't a question we ask ourselves so often. It arises maybe sometimes when we're looking for a sense of purpose in our life, right? But it's again not one that we very often really explore. And the reality is that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we had a visiting scholar from the UK, Sheikh Sa'ad al-Azhari, and he did a workshop on the structure of the prophetic society, right? And in there, you'll see in examples of the Prophet ﷺ that he would assign tasks to various people. Like nowadays, if you think about the masjid, generally you have one caretaker, and he sees to just everything in the masjid, right? But back in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was someone who, would perfume the mosque. There was someone who would straighten the safs. There was someone who would call the adhan. There was someone who would do just like various different tasks around the masjid. And so if you think about it in terms of an attraction model, right? If everyone needs to show up to do their thing, you now have people in the masjid, like on a regular basis. You also have people who are committed to the masjid. You have people who feel like they're contributing. For a lot of us, when you think about how the masjid has to appeal for funds, and how when you look at those making an effort, it's usually the same faces over and over, over and over, over and over. Why? Because certain of us have found an attachment to the masjid, and others we just haven't. And when we're in recovery, trying to identify a space of belonging and a space where people experience us as worthwhile and contributing, and where we start to experience appreciation. These are all key parts to recovery, key parts to rebuilding our self-esteem. So the invitation here for you is to find ways in which you can be of service. And this doesn't mean that you need to have a certificate in a particular skill set. So many of us, if you just think about it, grammar drives us around the bend, right? Like you have people who are just like, I believe the term for it is like a grammar Nazi, right? Where you see misused pronouns and you just, it drives you crazy, right? Spelling is just, the cherry on top when it's poor spelling. So if you think about it, there are people who pay attention to work, to written work in this way. If you wanted, you could go down to your nearest organization and volunteer as an editor. Now, again, maybe you don't charge, or maybe you don't see yourself as being officially equipped to do these things. But for the most part, so many of us have skills already that we don't even realize. Much like we look at the addictive behavior and how the patterns play through in different aspects of our life, so too do our strengths. Just because we are self-centered in one area of our life, chances are we will be self-centered in others. Similarly, when we have a strength in one area of our life, we can apply it to other areas of our lives. If you think about like running a household, right? So, and here our women folk tend to edge out ahead, from the men, because generally, you have women running the household, and so a simple thing like, if you look at the skill sets associated, there's organizing, there's planning, there's logistics, and these are all skills that your local organization needs. I can't think of an organization who wouldn't need things like planning. And planning becomes such a problem further down the line when planning isn't done properly in the beginning, right? So even if it was just someone sitting down and doing an organization's planner for the year, I can't tell you how many committees I've been on where, year after year, the conclusion that people come to is, what? We need someone who can do a planner for us. We need a planner as an organization. Oh my God. And then it's just the next year, the same problem, the same problem, the same problem. And these are tiny little skill sets that many people possess, and potentially you. And so you could be of use, to your local organization, to your local charity, your local school, your local whatever, right? It almost doesn't even matter, quite simply because the idea here is that you're attempting to be of service. So service is a huge tool for recovery. The other one is having an action plan, right? So I've mentioned several things here, but how do all of these things tie together? So when are you going to meetings? What are you going to do if you do binge eat? What are you going to do if you have a relapse? What is your plan of action when you're feeling a craving? As many situations as you find yourself in, that's how many plans of action or contingencies you'd potentially need. Quite simply because you don't want to fall back into relapse, right? So that's those are some of the tools of recovery for food. Then someone shared a question. They said that, and I invite you to hear this question without judgment, right? Simply because if you think about the honesty it takes to ask this question, it really speaks to a sense of vulnerability, but also a reality that's gone unspoken for way too long. So it's a gentleman, and he says, you know what? I really enjoyed porn, right? And the problem is that I know it's wrong, but I don't actually see a problem with it. Other than obviously it's like blatantly, like, forbidden. But I really enjoy the female form, And now the way he's struggling is, it's one thing to stay away from porn, but how do you manage around the trigger, which is the female form? So again, thank you for the question. It's a really important one, right? One of the things we have to appreciate about ourselves, especially as men, is on one level, the psychological and the physiological makeup, that we're created with. For instance, that there's a very useful documentary called "Your Brain on Porn," where they show you like the neurochemicals behind porn addiction and how it affects you, and they look at arousal and various other things. And so one of the things that they found was that men respond really well to novelty, right? Novelty simply being something new. So, or in this case, someone new, right? So they found that what they call the refractory period, which is the time it takes after a man has climaxed, his recovery time before he can go another round, right? So they found that generally it averages around 15-20 minutes, something like that. And that's with the same partner. When you introduce a different partner, the refractory period comes all the way down to somewhere closer to 10 minutes, right? Because with a new partner, there's a whole other part of our arousal template that gets triggered. There's the impact of novelty, and that just causes our body to react in a different way. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you find your partner attractive. This has nothing to do with whether or not you're committed to your partner. This has got nothing to do with how much you love your partner. This is just like hardwired into our makeup, right? Imam al-Haddad even speaks about in his book of assistance, and it's his thought is influenced heavily by Imam al-Hazali, and so he speaks about writing a book. And I might have mentioned this before. The whole idea behind, if you feel that you have knowledge that you'd like to transfer, right? You might say to yourself, but you know what? Like, let's say you want to write a self-help book. You might say, you know what? There are already so many self-help books, and there are only a handful of topics, and I'm just going to end up writing about something that someone else has already written about, right? So you could feel like a really despondent. But he says, no, don't be despondent. Write your book. Quite simply because it's human nature to be attracted to what is new, right? So as humans, we actually love novelty. So even if you are writing a book on something that's been covered before, chances are people will still buy the book because they want information presented in a new way, right? And you see the if you pay attention to titles over time, you'll see every couple of years there's the same sort of theme that comes up, and someone else has now written on the theme, but essentially they're touching on the same body of work, and bestsellers nonetheless. So as men, we are attracted to novelty, right? And porn provides a how can I say, it's probably the one thing in life that gives us access to the greatest amount of novelty. If you were to scroll through a page full of pictures of various different women, you've now seen, and we have to transpose this against reality, right? The reality, if we were living according to Sharia, then the only woman we see naked is our spouse. And it takes considerable work before that happens. You can't just, say, hey, I want to see you naked. There's, first, the introduction, there's getting to know each other, there's, discussion of marriage and identifying with the right person, there's paying of a dowry, there's an actual wedding ceremony, etc., and then only, right? And so that's the one person that you see, and then potentially that's the only person you see, right? Whereas in porn, if you let's say you are unfaithful or in a relationship with multiple women, then chances are you'll see someone else, but it's going to be like at most a handful of women. It's not even going to be that many, right? You could potentially count on your one hand how many women you're going to see. But in porn, you have access to several hundred, if not thousands of women, like within just a matter of scrolling. Now, it's one thing to say, porn is wrong, okay, I'm going to leave it off, right? And you might think, okay, cool, I'm safe. But the reality is, if you look at social media, Instagram, for instance, right, the moment you hit the discover button, it's just image after image after image after image of people you don't know. And so it's just more and more and more and more, and potentially endless, right? And the distinction that this particular person made when speaking about, loving the female form is by sharing that part of it, it speaks to the honesty of his condition. It speaks to the reality that it's not just a naked female form that men are attracted to. You can be attracted to someone's smile, you can be attracted to their hair, you can be attracted to their lips, you can be attracted to their eyes, you can be attracted to their skin, you can be attracted to just about anything, right? And this is the point, right? That the more honest we get about what we find attractive, the more honest we can be when it comes to identifying where the boundaries, right? Ideally, we should simply apply the advice of the Prophet ﷺ, which is to lower your gaze, right? And in the realm of porn and sex addiction, this is like a generally accepted principle in terms of a tool of recovery. You'll have people talking about what they call the 3-second rule, where they, if they do catch themselves looking, in Islam we taught that the first look is for you, but the second is against you, right? And some people joke about, okay, well, if you're going to look, then look like once, but look long, right? But that's, your intent is skewed there, right? So they speak about the 3-second rule, that if you do happen, like generally, you want to lower your gaze, and you'll find guys as a practice, they talk about counting tiles. So they'll maybe go shopping with their spouses or whatever, and so, or in an environment like a mall where they are going to be surrounded by women, right? So they'll literally count tiles. They'll just walk around, focused on the floor as opposed to looking up. But part of what they're doing is that they're really guarding themselves against even the initial spark of a craving. So when we, again, one of the ayahs that many of us hear relative to sex in Islam is وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا zina, and don't even go near zina. Not don't commit it, don't go near it. And so the whole idea of near is what leads to, right? It's those things that are adjacent to. So texting, flirting, whatever else leads to that, don't go near that. And it begins with noticing, right? And so some of the tools that are in place are to prevent even noticing happen. So lowering your gaze, for instance, prevents you from noticing. The 3-second rule is an intervention upon having noticed. So you might notice, but then, okay, 3 seconds, and then look away. And like, doesn't matter how silly you look, but literally look away and continue to look away. Right? Like, force yourself to break that. Grab hold of and dominance over your nafs, like, immediately by applying that. There's a movie that was made about porn and sex addiction. I think it's called Shame. And in as the guy walks down the street, he does this with his hand. And this is basically him counting to 3. That's his 3-second rule that he's applying. That as he notices, okay, 1, 2, 3, carry on, keep walking. Earlier in the week, I mentioned to you guys the whole idea of watching the train go by, right? Which is, if you're not physically seeing the person, if an image comes to mind, something that you may have seen in the past, right? Or if you experience euphoric recall, someone shared that the memory of what they looked out is so clear to them. It's as if it's playing in 4K high definition in front of them. That's how clearly they can see it, right? And so euphoric recall can be just as troubling. And again, 3-second rule: just notice it and allow it to carry on. Just know that it's just going to play itself out. There's another tool that they use called fast forwarding the movie, right? And the idea behind it is that we may have ideas about acting out, like, maybe it's okay if I just look at it a little bit, or maybe I'm not really harming anyone if it's just in my mind, or if I and in the moment, especially when we feel arousal. I think there's a quote, one of the scholars, that in a state of arousal, man loses either it's 1/3 or 2/3 of his mental faculty, right? There's a rather crude term for it that people use on the internet, which is what they call post-nut clarity, or post-orgasmic clarity, which is after you've masturbated, or after you've slept with someone, there's that realization of, oh God, what have I done? Did I really do this? Oh no. And then there's the feeling of shame and humiliation and embarrassment, and feelings of disgust and disgrace, and those kinds of things that wash over us, right? And those aren't feelings we have access to when the thought initially occurs to us. So fast forwarding the movie is basically taking a moment to say, okay, cool, I feel a craving, or I've noticed someone really attractive, I'm thinking about approaching them, or I'm thinking about going on this website or that website, whatever. And before you act, you just take a moment to play the movie forward. So, okay, I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go on my PC, I'm going to go on that website, I'm going to end up masturbating, or I'm going to contact this person and we're going to chat, maybe we trade pictures, and potentially we sleep together. Whatever version of the act out there is, what is it going to be like at the end? So most of us think about that orgasmic bliss, and we focus on that part, thinking that's the end of that's not the end of the movie. The end of the movie is the shame and the guilt and the downward spiral afterwards. Our inability to look at ourselves, our inability to, from that point, for instance, go perform salah. Why? Because we first need to take a ghusl. Our inability to face Allah, our inability to connect with Allah. Why? Because we just feel shameful and terrible, and I'm in a state of impurity. So, can I even make dua? Like, would that even be accepted? Can I make tawbah like this? Would that be accepted? And then our inability to face our family. And I often mention this, that people sometimes think that pornography is a victimless crime. But someone once mentioned that they're actually able to tell when their partner has watched pornography. Not by checking their history, not by catching the act, not by finding soiled undergarments or anything like that, right? Used tissues, whatever. None of that. Simply by observing their behavior. Why? Because they become distant, or they become emotionally cold. They are perhaps a little bit more short-tempered, or less patient, or more demanding, or they become angry quicker. Any variation of these things, and obviously it's going to be different for different people, right? But this particular person just had it down to like a science. She could tell immediately when her husband was watching pornography. She was so good, she could tell a few days before he was going to watch that he would watch. Because again, a relapse doesn't happen in the moment. Usually we're triggered, a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, even a month prior. Something happens and it sets us off into a spiral of obsessive thought, thinking about, how can I feel better? Not necessarily arriving at the conclusion of acting out immediately, but perhaps, getting there in a very roundabout way. So especially when we don't have support structures in place, when we're not talking to a recovery buddy or a sponsor, or we're not attending meetings, or we're not sharing with a therapist, or we're not, just being honest about the fact that, today I feel triggered, right? When you share about today I feel triggered, that starts to take that edge away. It starts to reduce the craving. The more you share, the more it gets handled, because potentially that craving is coming out of a sense of dis-ease, right? And so the lack of those things mean that that initial trigger that sets off our addictive pattern, the pattern then basically just gains momentum until we act out. And in the absence of any intervention, the act out becomes invariable or inevitable, right? So because of this, this lady was actually able to tell when her husband was acting out. She just, by looking at him, just by observing her behavior, by observing his behavior, his attitude towards it, she would know exactly, right? You know what? There's an act out on the horizon. So, for us as addicts, it's important, to appreciate the fact that not only does our behavior hurt others, but others notice. We like to think that we are, like super secretive, and that if we don't tell, then no one's going to know, and if we don't disclose, then we're safe. But the reality is, people see it all the time, and the problem though is that they may not have a word for it, they may not have a name for it. So a husband who's never admitted to having a porn addiction, his wife isn't going to be able to say, you have a porn addiction, right? Obviously she catches him repeatedly or whatever, but in the absence of evidence, she's not going to have a name for it, but she's going to be experiencing the effects of it nonetheless. So you find that a lot of spouses, once, and this goes with for any addiction, once they identify that their partner has a problem, one of the most common things that they say is, "Oh, thank God I have a name for this, because I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind." Why? Because an addict by nature is going to defend his or her addiction. And so he's going to tell their spouse, no, you're crazy. This thing, what you're saying doesn't make sense, and it's not like this, and it's not like that. And so you're creating this in your head, and you're making it up, and you're distorting the facts, and whatever, right? And so we can make our partners seem like they're crazy when in fact they're not. So it's just, I suppose, a bit of encouragement for us to continue the journey, even when we feel like, no, we've got a handle on things, and no, it's okay, or it's okay to dabble every now and again. Every now and again just means we're still sick. It means we're still addicts, So with this, I'll leave it there. We ask that Allah grant us openings of understanding within ourselves, openings with regards to the level of honesty that we can muster, openings with regards to a willingness and the ability as well to work the program, to work the steps, to put in practice some of the tools, whether it's the 3-second rule, whether it's lowering our gaze, or whether it's calling a friend, whatever it is that we need, that Allah grant us the opening to act on it, and to give us consistency in these behaviors, in applying these tools, and that He recognize our struggle and facilitate for us, and that He uses our desire to draw closer to Him as a dua, that He uses our efforts as a dua, and that He responds to it by drawing us closer to Him. So with that, I'll speak to you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alhamdulillah.